Good morning, good morning, good morning. It is Tuesday morning, 8:42 in the morning. This would be July the 29th, I believe. July the 29th. This was actually 28th. Let's see if I can see what the date is. Yeah, July the 29th. So on this day, I am actually going back and reviewing my study from yesterday, which was in Leviticus chapter 26, verse number 26. I fought all yesterday to try to get this video to you, like several times. Yesterday I was trying to get the video to you, and then I ended up doing the actual video at like 10 o'clock at night, and I was tired, and I don't want to get this video to you like that. Now I know my time right now is limited, very limited, because in a few I have to run out the door. So I want to get as much of this done as I possibly can, and then I'm going to come back. One of the reasons that I felt it important to go over this again is because my look at from this morning, my look at what, or outlook at what I was reading has changed. Changed or shifted or grown. That one is grown. So Leviticus 26:26. I'm going to read to you what it says. It says, when I have cut off your supply of bread, and this is the Lord speaking, and he is speaking to his people. And at this point in time, we're in what I call the 5 waves of discipline. I call it the 5 waves of discipline, or waves of discipline. And I call it that because what I saw was that God would discipline, and then he'll look for a response. And he's like, okay, you're not listening, right? We'll do this again. Discipline you even more. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to read those to you. So it will be verse 14 and 15 of Leviticus chapter 26 tells us why God was doing this. The first 13 verses is all the blessings that he wanted to give to his people. But he acknowledged that he acknowledged that we are a stubborn and a hard-headed people. And so he says, but, because, that there's a shift, So he says, but if you do not obey me, after saying all the things he wanted to do for us, he says, if you do not obey me, and if you do not observe all these commandments, and if you despise my statutes, and your soul abhors my judgments, so that you do not perform my commandments, but break my covenant. Now, listen, God only gave 10 commandments. There was a lot of laws, yes, but God only gave 10 commandments. The first 3 had to do with how we worship him. Not to have no other gods before him. Not to take his name in vain. And what was the other one? Man, I should know these. But I have it written down. Okay. Not to have no other gods before him. Oh, not to make a carved image for ourselves. And then not to take his name in vain. So the first 3 of the commandments that God gave out of 10, 3 out of 10 had to deal with our relationship with him. Again, not to take his name in vain. Not to make any carved images of anything on earth, on earth, in heaven, or even under the sea. Not to make carved images of anything, to worship these things. And also to have no other gods before him. No other, that put nobody before God. No man, nobody before God. Commandment number 4 was a covenant that he gave us to keep, and that was the Sabbath. He said to keep the Sabbath holy. remember, he said, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. And then the rest of the commandments, the next 6, had to deal with our interaction with one another. How I interact with you, how you interact with me, how we interact with the next person. Number 1, he said about our parents. We would honor our parents, honor our mother and our father. He said that we would not murder. And I like how Jesus even enhanced that when he came down, because Jesus did not do away with these commandments. When he came down, he said that if we were angry with our brother, we just as good as murdered them. So he dealt with us even as far as our anger. It says, do not murder. That was number 6. Number 7, do not commit adultery. That part is big. That part is big, especially as I'm beginning to understand even more about the adultery that God charged his people with, being a harlot or prostitutes, adultery. He said, do not steal, do not bear false witness, do not covet. Now, each one of those laws, those laws still stand today. They still stand today. Do not covet. Do not covet something that belongs to someone else. Do not strongly desire something that belongs to someone else, because you might end up trying to take it. And that's stealing. Not to commit adultery. You have to be in a marital relationship to commit adultery. If you're not married, it's called fornication. So he's saying, as far as children, again, honor your parents, your mother and your father. He's saying to not murder. That's how we deal with our brothers. Not get so angry with somebody that, would just snap to the point that we'll kill them, like what Cain did with his brother. He said to not commit adultery. Now you're looking at the marital arrangement. He says to not steal, to not bear false witness, not lie on somebody, and to not covet. And so people are walking around here today talking about, I'm not under the law. What law are you not under? So when you're saying that you're not under the law, you're saying that it's okay to not honor your parents? Because that was what God gave. That was the law. Are you saying it's okay to murder when you're not under the law? It's okay to murder? Because that was the law that God gave us. And as a matter of fact, when he gave that law about not murdering, he gave that law to Noah. That was not a Mosaic law. When he said to not commit adultery, are you saying now, if you're married and you're not under the law, that it's okay to commit adultery? He said to not steal. So you're saying stealing is okay? You're not under law? When he said to not bear false witness, so you're saying that lying is okay because you're not under the law. Do you see? So people walking around here, and when I say people, I mean in the church, they're walking around and they're saying, I'm not under law, I'm under grace. So you mean to tell me that grace makes it okay for you to do these things? So God says in Leviticus 26:14 and 15, if you don't obey me. That's what happened with Adam and Eve. They did not obey. God gave them one law. He planted a garden, a beautiful garden full of many trees, many variety of trees. And there's this one tree out of this many variety of trees. And he says, that's the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And that wasn't the only tree that was in the middle of the garden. There were 2 trees that were in the middle of the garden. There was a tree of life, and there was a tree of knowledge of good and evil. And he said, only of this one tree that was in the middle of the garden, he said, don't eat of it, the knowledge of good and evil. And yet, when God created everything, he called it good. So if you really think about it, what God was telling Adam and Eve is, you don't eat from this one. And the only thing that they will be missing is the knowledge of evil. Why do we need to know and understand evil? Why? What? That like makes no sense when everything God gave us was good. So they didn't obey. He says, if you do not obey me, and there's consequences for that. But every parent gives their child consequences. Don't do this. If you do this, such so is going to happen. In teaching their child, every child teaches them. Like for instance, you'll say to your child, don't touch that stove, it's hot. If you touch that stove, you're going to burn yourself, it's going to hurt. Don't do that. There's consequences. If you touch the stove, you're going to burn yourself, you're going to hurt yourself. The rule is don't touch the stove. And so what do a child do? They go and touch the stove. Did I tell you not to? It hurt, don't it? So he says, if you do not obey me, this is Leviticus 26:14. If you do not observe all these commandments. What commandments? It was 10. It was only 10. Even Moses said that God only gave 10. If you read in Deuteronomy, Moses said God only gave 10. He says, if you despise my statutes, that's the written laws where God wrote those 10 commandments out. So if you despise my statutes, if your soul abhors my judgments, it says, so that you do not perform all of my commandments, but break my covenant. And what was that covenant? There was one covenant that was a part of the 10 commandments. And that was the covenant of Sabbath. He said, remember my Sabbath to keep it holy. He said, I also do this to you. And so that was the first wave of discipline. And then he says in verse 18, and after all of this, talking about the first wave of discipline, after I've disciplined you with this, he says, if you do not obey me, okay, we're going to do this. This is what's going to happen next. Then you get to verse 21. Right before going into the third wave of discipline, right after the second wave, he says, then if you walk contrary to me, which means if the Lord is walking this way, we're walking with the Lord, and then he shifts. No, let's do it this way. We're walking with the Lord, and then he shifts. We should shift with him. But if we don't, and we begin to walk a different way, then we're walking contrary to the Lord. Listen, when you're riding in a car, in a vehicle together, you see this side by side, and the vehicle turns, you're both turning, right? That's how we're supposed to walk with the Lord. Whichever way imagine riding in a vehicle. Oh, I got a good one for you. A long time ago, there were these motorcycles that had the little compartments on the side where you could have somebody not sitting behind you, but in a little compartment on the side. So I seen these, it was like these like funny old movies or whatever, where the motorcycle is going and then the motorcycle turns, but the compartment is still going and it's going out. So God says, if you walk contrary to me and are not willing to obey. And that part, free will, you're looking at the free will right there. Because God says, if you are not willing to obey me. He said, okay, this is going to happen. And that was that third wave of discipline. And then after that third wave, and so what I found with each of these waves, before he brought on the next wave, he always gave us a chance. And that reminds me of that talk show, that game show. It's a game show, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, right? And so the host of the show would say, is that your final answer? Who wants to be a millionaire? You want to be a millionaire? I want to be a millionaire. King Jesus came that we might have life and have it more abundantly. And so I think of that when I see this. Then if you walk contrary to me and are not willing to obey me, is that your final answer? All right. This is going to happen. And so now it says, and if by these things, now you had 3 waves of discipline. If by these things you are not reformed, changed by me, but walk contrary to me, meaning he's going this way and we're going that. Listen, that's where we come to this fourth wave of discipline. And so we're in this study that I'm doing now is the very last thing that God was bringing or stating as far as the fourth wave before going into that fifth wave. And that very last thing, again, verse 26 is, when I have cut off your supply of bread, 10 women shall break your... I'm still doing it. Okay, so what I'm doing is, as I read this sentence, the sentence says 10 women shall bake your bread in one oven, and I keep saying 10 women shall break, and I meant bake. And so that's funny to me, because with every single video that I have tried to do on this study, I've said the same thing, messed up in the same area. So I'm gonna read this again. When I've cut off your supply of bread, 10 women shall bake your bread in one oven, and they shall bring back your bread by weight, and you shall eat and not be satisfied. So when I tell you, I did one video for this, and that was video 12, I think it or 11, 10, I don't know what the video number was, but this past Thursday, I worked on this, and I actually focused on this first part. And when I came back Monday, I thought I was going to focus on the last, but God had me go over it all over again. So anyway, this morning when I got up, it was like 4 in the morning, so I always date and put the time on my notes. As a matter of fact, let me show you. Tuesday 29th, and what that say, 4:26 in the morning. So when I was looking at it this morning, and I realized I was listening to something, audiobook. I was listening to an audiobook by Jonathan Kahn, and it's one of his books that I actually listen to over and over and over again. So anyway, I realized that I've taken some things for granted, and what I've taken for granted is bread. So remember when we first started off, and I started talking to you about the law, and I started talking to you about how we like to say we're not under law. I'm not under law, I'm under grace. But yet when you look at those 10 commandments that God gave his people, what of that is we not under? Like literally, what of that is we not under? We require, we require that our children honor us. Not only do we require that our children honor us, we require in like those of you who are going to church and you have pastors over you, you are required to honor your pastor and to honor your leaders. So what part of this commandment is we not under? You tell your children, you teach your children to not lie. What part of the law is we're not under? Because the law that God gave his people was 10 commandments that God gave. And so I mention that because as time went on and more people were born on the face of this earth, and people full of sin, born in iniquity, began to do things that required additions or amendments to the law. Amendments to the law. Just like today, we have what's called, here in America, we have the Constitution. And there are amendments to this Constitution, and so there are many laws. People like to first, it wasn't just 10 commandments, it was more. It was 10 that God gave, and there was 613 that was broken down into 613 laws, right? But all of these laws fit under these 10 commandments. I started studying that too. I had to go back and look at all this stuff. I had to look at it for myself and make sure that I'm understanding, because what I'm finding is that people haven't been teaching and telling things correctly. So, and stuff has been handed down. And if we just take what's handed down to us and we don't go and do the research, if that's what we're doing, then we're in a position where we're being led astray. And so let's take bread. Let's do something real simple. That's why I said this morning, this morning, I realized that there are things that I have taken for granted. Bread. We're going to talk about bread because this verse says, when I have cut off your supply of bread. We're talking about the fourth wave of discipline. God will only do this if we are being disobedient. He wants to bless us. As a matter of fact, this is what he says. And it's when he was giving the blessings before even started, before even getting to that point where he said, okay, and if we're going to be disobedient, this is what's going to happen. So this is what he says. This is verse number 5. It says, well, I'm starting verse 4. Nope, I'm starting verse 3. It says, if you walk in my statutes, if you walk in them and keep my commandments. How many was it? Let's say it together. 10. He says, if you walk in my statutes and keep my commandments and perform them, then I will give you rain in its season. The significance of rain, like we have gardens. So when it rains, we be like, yay. Every time it rains, I'm like, yay, because it waters the garden so that the stuff can grow. It says, I will give you rain in its season. The land shall yield its produce, thank you, Lord, and the trees of the field shall yield their fruit, meaning they'll give it to you. It says, your threshing shall last till the time of vintage, and the vintage shall last till the time of sowing. You shall eat your bread to the full, and dwell in your land safely. And then it goes on, but it says about the bread, you shall eat to the full. Why? Because you're getting all of this. The land is producing, the trees is producing and yielding its harvest to you. So he says over here, when I cut off that supply, when I dried up, when I cut off that supply, he said 10 women shall bake your bread in one oven, and they shall bring back your bread by weight, and you shall eat and not be satisfied. And here's the thing that I took for granted when I said bread. I learned something very interesting today, early this morning, completely caught me off guard. In the year 1262, we're in 2025. In the year 1262, in medieval England, there was a law that went into effect on bread. A law on bread, y'all. And here's the thing. That law that went into effect, now 1262, I was born in the late 1900s, middle 1900s. And 1262, that's like over 700 years like prior to my being born. So that means that this law had been in effect, and I was born, it was in effect before I was born. Listen, this law was put into effect before I was born. Now I'm studying covenants, and I released a video yesterday in reference to covenants, and we were looking at we were studying Exodus chapter 2, but it had us go back and review the older covenants, the covenants that God made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because God said that he remembered those and he was keeping those. So at this point in Exodus, he's moving to keep those covenants. And so when I thought about it and I reviewed those covenants, and I thought about Isaac was born under a covenant, under a law that was already established. He was born under that. And so these laws today, you and I, were born long after these laws were established. It's not like we're living and then all of a sudden, bam, here comes a law. Now we can't do this. Now we can't do that. It's not like that. So in 1262, in medieval England, there was a law placed on bread that is still in existence today. that you and I don't even think about when we go into the store and buy bread. Why would we? I bet you didn't even know that it existed. I just learned about it. You probably knew. You probably really knew. But I just learned about it. Didn't even know it existed. The law is called the assize of bread and ale. The assize of bread and ale. And what it was this law that was put into effect was not meant to hurt any of us. It was meant to protect our rights. Listen. To ensure for fair trade, to protect consumers. Now, I'm a consumer, you're a consumer. And we will go to the store and we will consume bread from the store so that we could take it home and consume it and eat it. And so this law that was put into effect years before we were born was put into effect because when the bakers baked their bread, the various breads, and sold them, these breads will come out to different sizes, different weights, and so they would sell them for a certain price, and then the people would be like, I'm not getting my money's worth. They'd be like, I'm not getting my money's worth. And so this law that was put into effect was so that the bakers would weigh the bread, because the bread had to weigh a certain amount. It had to weigh 1 pound. 1 pound? I think it was 1 pound. That was the standard weight. 1 pound. And if the bread weighed under that, the baker would get in trouble. Who would get in trouble? The baker, not us, the consumer. So these laws was put in place for us. We don't even think about it. Do you go in the store when you get ready to buy bread of any type and look to see how much do it weigh? You look to see which one you want. It was because of this law that led to the origin of what's called the baker's dozen. Now, you hear about the baker's dozen when it comes to donuts. You know, they sell them, you could get 6, you could get 12, you know, the baker's dozen, right? This is what my notes say, because it says, so this law in 1962 went into effect to dictate the price, the weight, and the quality to protect consumers from fraud and to ensure fair trade. It was this law that led to the origin of the baker's dozen. The law's purpose was so that consumers would receive the correct amount of bread for their money. Violations of this law was met with fines and other punishments. So this law actually set the precedent for consumer protection laws. This law on bread, it set the precedence for consumer protection laws. In 1993, which was 32 years ago, a law went into effect called the Leviticus French. Leviticus Pain, P-A-I-N, Pain French. That law that went into effect in 1993 governed how French bread was made. In 1822 and 1836, Bread Acts went into effect, stipulating that loaves were to be sold by the pound, or in increments of a pound, so 1 pound, 2 pounds, like that, but it was by the pound. During World War II, bakers were instructed to use 14-ounce tins to save flour, and this size, which is 400 grams if you're using a metric system, became the industry standard. In 2008, the law was abandoned. In 2008, this law was abandoned, allowing for the production of breads of any weight. And the reason why the law was abandoned in 2008 is because people began to want the artisan bread. That's like people making these fresh breads, and they wanted the artisan bread. So it says, this got me to thinking about the law, and yeah. And it did. It got me to thinking about the law because, number one, here we are. We're living under and operating under a whole bunch of laws that we don't even know exist. But we're walking around here talking about I'm not under law. I'm under grace. Really now? You're not under law. You're under grace. But you'll go in and buy a loaf of bread out of the store that has a law on it that dictates how it's made. I learned a lot about bread too. Like literal bread. Like if you like your white breads or your wheat breads, you want your bread like nice and fluffy and airy, you're basically buying water. You're basically buying water. You got to go and look that up. The more hydrated water, the more water, and it's the ratio of water to flour. So the more water is in the bread, that's what makes it light and airy, like your Wonder Breads and your butternut breads and your Sara Lee and Pepperidge Farms and all these other breads. When they're light and airy, that's why, because there's more water in it. But when you have your dense bread, like your rye breads, when you have your dense breads, that's because it's not a lot of water in it, so it's more flour. And so yeah, I learned a lot about that. And again, what had me looking at that is this scripture here where it says, when I have cut off your supply of bread, when I have cut off your supply of bread, 10 women shall bake your bread in one oven, and they shall bring back your bread by weight, and you shall eat and not be satisfied. Now, one thing I can say is that when doing this study last Thursday, I went into detail about the cutting off of the supply of bread, because it stood out to me, because I know that God is a merciful God, and I know that he is a just God, and I know that he is a God who wants to bless us. And so I went in, and before I even dug into the scriptures that dealt with the famine, because that's what we ended up looking at, famine. Before I dealt with that, I wanted to look at 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 8 through 15, where it says about how God wants to bless us abundantly. Like, that's his desire. And so I realized that to get to this point, wave number 4, where he's talking about now cutting off our supply right before going into wave number 5, when we get to this point, that's a lot of hard-headedness. That's a lot of disobedience. That's a refusal to listen to God, to be reformed by God. And so he's like, okay, I'm about to shut up everything now. I'm about to shut up everything. So what I want to focus on with this study is the part where he says, 10 women shall bake your bread in one oven. They shall bring back your bread by weight, and you should eat and not be satisfied. So in reference to the 10 women, the first thing I thought is, man, that's a lot of people. That's a lot. Like, I literally saw like 10 women in one kitchen trying to cook one loaf of bread to bring to a person. And I was like, there's too many people in the kitchen. There's too many cooks in the kitchen. And I went to go look that up, because I'm like, I know that's a saying. Let me go see what that means. And when I went to look it up, I found that it's an idiom that basically means that when there are too many people involved in a task, especially one that leads to a singular vision or direction, it can lead to confusion, conflict, and a poor outcome. Because too many people trying to contribute will actually hinder the process and the quality rather than improve it. So keep that in mind, because after I looked up that I thought, I went to go look into the fact that, because again, when numbers are used in the Bible, that's another thing I learned. Numbers are significant. So I looked up 10. The number 10, it symbolizes divine law, judgment, and completion. And so the examples that was given was that of the 10 commandments, and then you have the 10 plagues. So then I continued doing my research, and so got my notes here. It says, when I looked up references on what was meant by 10 women baking bread in one oven. Okay, so this is what I read, and I did not agree with what I read, because what they said was, or what the notes said on the computer was, regarding, and they was talking about the severity of the famine, which, yes, we knew it was a famine because God started off in that verse by saying, when I cut off your supply of bread. So we knew, and in those reference verses for that part was Psalm 105, 16, Isaiah 3:1, Ezekiel 4:16, Ezekiel 5:16, and Ezekiel chapter 14 verse 13. We looked all those up already with the other video. So we knew that there was a famine. We knew that it was a famine for physical bread, but we also knew that there was a famine for spiritual bread, because that's in Amos chapter 11, chapter 8 verse 11. So the comment that was made regarding these 10 women was in reference to the famine, but this is what it said. It says the famine was severe because each family was forced to share one oven. And I'm looking at that and I'm like, I'm like, no, that's not it. And I said no to that. I said no to that. Listen, just because you do the research and you see people's research, that don't mean you have to agree with their research either. I said no to that for this reason. It says 10 women shall bake your bread. It did not say in one oven. 10 women shall bake your bread in one oven. It did not say 10 women was baking their bread. So if 10 women was baking their bread, they each had bread that they was making for themselves in this one oven. So yes, they're sharing, but it did not say their. It said your, meaning that 10 women is making your bread. It's a singular vision, and the vision is to give you. So you got 10 women working on bread for you. It's confusion. There is confusion, which is what I saw initially. There's confusion, there's conflict, because they're all trying to break. They're all trying to bake you bread. Yeah, so I couldn't flow with that. I'm like, yeah, no, that what they were saying, that's not right. So the 10 women were all associated with the person they were using one oven to bake this bread for. Leviticus also says that, and so basically for that part, I'm seeing the confusion, the chaos, the confusion in the kitchen. So the next thing is they shall bring back your bread by weight. And that was what led me to what I saw today, bringing back your bread by weight. What initially, when I looked at that, I was reminded of the Israelites when they were in the wilderness, when they had first left out of Egypt. And they left out of Egypt, all that slavery, that slave labor they had to go through. God took that off of them, and He's got them in the wilderness. Now we on this trip, we getting ready to go, and they start complaining. They started complaining, y'all. When I was in Egypt, when you was in Egypt, you was a slave. When you was in Egypt, you was undergoing hard labor, and they were whipping you. But when I was in Egypt, I had pots full of meat and bread. Really? Let me make sure I'm not in my feelings. I need to make sure I'm not in my feelings. Because just how they behaved. They were always complaining. Always complaining. So Exodus chapter 16 is where you see this. I would encourage you to read Exodus chapter 16. I really don't have time to dig into this like I would want to, because I got to be mindful of the time, because we're going to be leaving real soon. But in Exodus chapter 16, God gave them manna from heaven, and He said that they had to gather. This is verse number 4. It says, then the Lord said to Moses, behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go and gather a certain quota every day, that I may test them whether they will walk in my law or not. And then what you'll find is later on, like when He did that, he gave them an amount. They were supposed to pick up 1 omer. 1 omer. An omer is a weight. It's a measurement, a weight. And they would pick up 1 omer per person. So in your household, if there's 2 people in your household, you would pick up 2 omers and bring it in. or if there's 3 people, 3 omers. You understand? 1 omer per person. And so there was some who picked up more. They had more people in their household. There was some who picked up less because they didn't have that many people in their household. And when they did, they had enough. They had the sufficiency that they needed. They didn't have too much. They didn't have too little. Now they also was given a I don't know about that. I'm looking at my notes for a second. I'm sorry. So they were also given an instruction on Friday. I mean, on the 6th day. On the 6th day, they would have picked up double the amount. And the reason that they would have picked up double the amount was because on Saturday, I mean, on the 7th day, it was not going to rain bread. Why? Because it was a rest day. So it was not going to happen. So they picked up double. So you had some who, you had some who listened, but you had some who didn't. And so for those who didn't listen, that, day 1 through 5, you only pick up 1 omer. So some was picking up more, or they were supposed to, because again, you got to go back and read it. Exodus chapter 16. But they were told to not keep any of it overnight, because they were going to be given it every day. So don't store it like how we have things, like we'll go buy in bulk, right? And then we'll store it in our refrigerator. Keep in mind that they were in the wilderness. Keep in mind that they lived in tents. Keep in mind that they did not have the amenities that we have today. They did not have a refrigerator. Keep that in mind when you're reading these stories. So they were told to not store anything overnight, but some of them was hard-headed and they tried to hold it overnight, and so the next day it was worms in there, maggots, full of maggots. Yeah. But God said he was doing this to test them whether they would be obedient to what he said do. And so that part, like, I want to be obedient to the Lord. I want to be obedient to the Lord. And one of the things that I've been asking the Lord to help me with is to not be rebellious, to not be disobedient, to open my ears so I can hear clearly. He said that when I don't understand anything, I can ask him. Like that part, like I'm listening. It's serious, it's significant, and so we're gonna stop. That was the bringing of back the bread by weight, and I'm gonna pause here so I'm gonna get myself ready so we can run out the door. And when I come back, we're gonna look at the part of where he said you should eat and not be satisfied, which is the last part of that verse. So I'll be back. Almost done and ready to get back to you guys and finish up what we were talking about in Leviticus chapter 26. I almost said Exodus chapter 2, but in Leviticus chapter 26. So I'm almost done. Thank you for being patient. Hey, I am back. It is still Tuesday. It's 3:16 in the afternoon, and let's finish up this video. We left off looking at we were in Leviticus, of course, chapter 26, verse number 26, and we left off at the 3rd part where it talked about how the bread will be brought back with weight. It says, they shall bring back your bread by weight. Now, I went and, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier when I was doing this video before leaving out to run my errands, but I went and saw this website. The website is called Zippia.com, Zippia.com, and basically it's a site where like an analytical type site. But what they did was they looked at the price of bread all over. After having learned what I did about these laws that are literally in place in reference to bakers baking bread, and like how much the bread is supposed to weigh and what affects the weight, like actually water, how much water, the water flour ratio that affects the weight. And so anyway, I was looking at the price, and let me show you that now. Let me show you that right here. All right, so I haven't seen it. The crazy thing is, when I was looking at these different things about bread and how much bread costs in the various states here in America, it just dawned on me, like, we would rather go out and pay for bread as opposed to buying what we need to make it ourselves. Like, yeah, that's crazy. And I'm saying that, and I still go out and pay for bread, you know, but it's something that I actually want to do. I just haven't stepped off into that area of making bread. Not yet. It's coming. It's coming. Trust me, it is coming. So now the last part of verse 26 of Leviticus chapter 26 says, you shall eat and not be satisfied. You shall eat and not be satisfied. Now there was 1, 2, 3 reference scriptures with that. And while I looked at the other day when I was doing this video, I looked up one of them, and then the other two I kind of like skimmed through it. But you know, here we are, this is Tuesday, you know, and I'm feeling refreshed now as opposed to when I originally was trying to do this video. So let's look at these scriptures now. So the first one will be Isaiah chapter 9. Isaiah chapter 9. And remember, we're talking about the fact that the Lord said that we would eat and not be satisfied. Like you're eating, but you're not getting enough. Isaiah 9:20. Now I have in my notes I have to look at the notes from the Bible on that verse. Isaiah chapter 9 verse 20. But let me read verse 20 to you, so you know what it says. So it says, and he shall snatch on the right hand, like snatch on the right hand, and be hungry, and he shall devour on the left and not be satisfied. It says, every man shall eat the flesh of his own arm. Every man shall eat the flesh of his own arm. What are they talking about there? Like, and one thing I do know in reading God's word is that, like, you could read the surface of it, but it be some deeper stuff that it be talking about. So I'm sure that the Father would give me a deeper revelation out of that. But right now, I'm looking at the surface of that scripture, and I'm like, The note says, the greediness of the people led them to consume everyone and everything in their path. Eventually, their hunger turned them on themselves. That's what the note says. And that's when I saw that, I'm like, wait a minute. Because it literally says here, every man shall eat the flesh of his own arm. And then it's talking about greediness, and then it's talking about people like being so hungry that they're eventually turning on themselves. And I was reminded of, hold on. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, I had to get that. So it says here, Isaiah chapter 9 verse 20, it says, and he shall snatch on the right hand and be hungry. He shall devour on the left hand and not be satisfied. Every man shall eat the flesh of his own arm. And then the note says, the greediness of the people led them to consume everyone and everything in their path. Eventually their hunger turned them on themselves. And I'm looking at this, right? And I'm like, what is this? What is this? And why does it sound so familiar? So one of the things I have learned is that, okay, so Isaiah was written before Nebuchadnezzar came and destroyed Judah and Jerusalem. Isaiah, I'm believing, was written around the time that Samaria was going through with Assyria. Samaria and Syria was being destroyed by Assyria. And so that made me go and look, and because I was remembering, like, I seen this before, and where the famine had gotten so bad that the Israelites were cannibalizing. I bet y'all saying, no way. No. So let me show it to you. This would be 2 Kings chapter 6. And it says Syria besieges Samaria in famine. I don't want to read this whole thing. And what's weird to me about this, though, because I actually need to read this whole thing, what's weird to me about this is that Syria and Israel, or Samaria, which was capital of Israel, they were like buddy. They're cousins, but they were like buddy. And they were both on the same side in standing against Assyria. And so they were trying to force the Jews, Judah, the tribe of Judah, they was trying to force them to join them in the stand against Assyria. But the Jews didn't want to do that. Judah didn't want to do that. So Judah reached out to Assyria. Judah reached out to Assyria and asked Assyria to help them against Syria and Samaria. And so they became vassals. So anyway, this, like, let me just read this. So it says, this is 2 Kings chapter 6 verse 24. It says, and it happened after that, and it happened after this, that Ben-Hadad, which was king of Syria, gathered all his army and went up and besieged Samaria. So that part is confusing to me, because why were them two now fighting, except for the fact that Syria had come under the control of Assyria, which meant that Syrians now had to fight. Like, whenever Assyria wanted to go and fight whatever country, the Syrians had to do that. That's the only thing that I could think of. And like I said, I need to go back and do the research on that, and that's for another day. But it was what happened in this story that I wanted to share with you guys, because it just really fit with what we're looking at in Isaiah, where it says he will snatch with the right hand and be hungry, devour on the left and not be satisfied, or not get enough. So anyway, so verse 25, and there was a great famine in Samaria, because that's one of the things that they do, you know, when it's a war, they cut off the food supply. So anyway, it says there was a great famine in Samaria, and indeed they besieged it, until a donkey's head was sold for 80 shekels. A donkey's head was sold for 80 shekels of silver, and 1/4 of a cab of dove droppings for 5 shekels of silver. Dove droppings, dove poop, really? It says, verse 26, then the king of Israel was passing by on the wall, and a woman cried out to him, saying, help, my lord, O king. And he said, if the Lord does not help you, where can I find help for you? From the threshing floor, or from the wine press? Then the king said to her, what is troubling you? And so she answered. She said, this woman said to me, give your son that we may eat him today, and we will eat my son tomorrow. So we boiled my son and ate him. And I said to her on the next day, give your son that we may eat him. But she has hidden her son. Now it happened when the king heard the words of the woman that he tore his clothes. And as he passed by on the wall, the people looked, and there underneath he had sackcloth on his body. Then he said, God do so to me and more also, if the head of Elisha, the son of Shaphat, remains on him today. Now, Elisha, we know Elisha the prophet. We know the things that he did. Part of one of the things was the healing of Naaman, the Syrian. It stands out to me that this king, instead of taking accountability, instead of dealing with the situation, he blames Elisha. Kind of reminds me of today. How anything happens wrong today, who is they gonna blame but the president? Nobody's taking accountability. Anyway, this is what the note says. Let's see, 2 Kings. We read 28. So this is what the note says. It says, this account of the siege of Samaria demonstrated the failure of the king. In broad terms, he failed because of sin. But in this context, he failed because of his rejection of the message of God's miraculous works. The account shows the king's interaction with the misery of the people and his personal failure. This failure came in a context in which God had provided past victories and lessons that could have led to peace and prosperity. The next, and that was overall, like I didn't read all the way down to chapter 7 verse 20, but that would have been overall, the note for overall. The note for verse 64 and 65 says, since neither the Israelites nor the Syrians were changed by the demonstrations of God's power, war eventually returned. Ideally, the circumstances of God's people should never have reached such a sorry state. That part, ideally, the circumstances of God's people should never have reached such a sorry state. The biblical plan was that a righteous king would defeat the enemies and save his people from such misery. In this time of spiritual failure, war had come with the devastating siege of Samaria and starvation among the people. In this time of spiritual failure, war had come with a devastating siege of Samaria and starvation among the people. The siege was so pressing that ceremonially unclean and detestable substances were being sold for exorbitant prices. Unclean and detestable substances. We read that when they were talking about selling the poop of a dove for 5 shekels. It's crazy. This contrasted with the concept that the king was responsible to provide for the people's needs, which the king is responsible to provide for the needs of the people. Now, that's not something that we will understand here in America because of the fact that this country is operated by a democracy. We the people, for the people. There's no kings here in this country. But over there in England, they have to pay for the king, the queen. They have to pay for, provide for the people. So like here where we're spending exorbitant amounts for healthcare, over there in England, healthcare is free. It says here, the people had the right to call to the king for help, but an unfaithful king could only make excuses and blame God. What we read in verse 28 and 29 about this woman and the issue she had with like a friend or whatever, a neighbor, whatever. It says the king's interview with one of the women involved in cannibalism illustrated a depth of sin that had been prophesied much earlier, and that prophecy actually took us back to Leviticus chapter 6, which is what we were looking at. But hold on, how about I saw that here in Jeremiah also, and that would be Jeremiah chapter 19, and this is what it says in verse 9. And I will cause, and this is the Lord speaking, he says, and I will cause them to eat the flesh of their sons and the flesh of their daughters, and everyone shall eat the flesh of his friend in the siege and in the desperation with which their enemies and those who seek their lives shall drive them to despair. And as I was reading this got me to thinking about what's going on right now over in Israel, over in Pakistan, over in Gaza, and in some of the other countries where there's been a lot of war, there's been a lot of death. They're dealing with food shortages now, with famines now, and this really got me to thinking about that and thinking about them. Micah chapter 6 verse 14 was the next scripture, reference scripture, and basically it was saying the same thing, that they should eat and not hunger, but it had a reference to, and the reference that it gave was Hosea chapter 4 verse 10, and I want to read that one because in Hosea chapter 4 verse 10 it tells us why these things are happening. So it says, for they shall eat but not have enough. They shall commit harlotry but not increase. Why? It says, because they have ceased obeying the Lord. And that is the problem. And all these things that we're reading about, all this disciplinary action, things that are happening, the problem was because, as shown in Hosea chapter 4 verse 10, they have ceased obeying the Lord. This last one that we're going to look at is Haggai chapter 1 verse 6. This is what it says. Actually, I'm going to start at verse 5. Verse 5 says, now therefore, thus says the Lord of hosts, consider your ways. You have sown much and bring in little. You drink, but you do not have enough. It says, no, I didn't read that right. So let me start again. Verse 5. Now therefore, thus says the Lord of hosts, consider your ways. You have sown much and bring in little. You eat, but do not have enough. You drink, but you are not filled with drink. You clothe yourselves, but no one is warm. And he who earns wages to put into a bag with holes. Let's read these notes. The first note, based on verse 5, consider your ways, is a call for serious thinking on the decisions of people were making and what these choices say about their priorities. Will they take the easy way out, or will they follow God's ways? He says, consider your ways. The note on verse 6 says, God was not blessing the work of their hands. It says there must be a theological reason why these people were not receiving what they needed. Verse 8, the note for verse 8 says God's desire was that the people build the temple and give priority to worshiping God. Whatever one does, God should always take pleasure in it and be glorified by it. These are two practical theological criteria that people can use to evaluate their life and set new priorities. Jesus set the example for everything he did was aimed to please God. The reason why he came to earth was to glorify God. And then finally, verse 9, it says, God purposely frustrated their efforts by not blessing and multiplying their produce. Instead, the fiery breath of his wrath consumed almost everything. Some might ask, why would God be so judgmental? But a more appropriate question would be, why would God not more quickly judge those who do not glorify him? God's house was in ruins because each man was busy with his own house. The covenant curses in Deuteronomy chapter 28 indicate that when God's covenant people do not love and serve him, he will neither bless their crops nor send rain. So we read all the notes, we covered all the scriptures, we're looking at a famine, but we also understand why. And then to see this, and to see, like, here even in the questions, is asking why. Like, why would God do these things? Why would God, what did it say here? Why would God be so judgmental? He's not acting judgmental. He literally warned ahead of time. And he literally gave opportunities for his people to turn around. Like, that's the next verse that we're looking at. Since we're now in, we have finished Leviticus chapter 26, verse 26, which is wave 4. We have completed wave 4, and our next waves or videos that are going to be done will be done from wave 5. Remember, there's 5 waves of discipline. And so God said in verse 27, after all this, after all these things that I've done, he says, if you do not obey me but walk contrary to me, then I also walk contrary to you in fury. And then he goes on to list the various things that he will do, and we're going to cover those next, but not now, not with this video, but with the videos to come. We will pick up then. So we're finally here. We're in it. We're in that 5th wave of discipline, and we're about to see. And what I want to share is what's so amazing about these studies is that that 3-part series that I just finished. That 3-part series enabled us, or caused us, to focus in on what it was that was being done, what it was that we're doing. This particular series has us looking at the issue, but it's not looking at the people, what the people of God was doing, but instead we're looking at God himself. And we're looking at what he says he will do to us. And so I'm looking forward to these next upcoming verses in Leviticus chapter 26. Again, we're going to be looking at the 5th wave now. There's 5 ways of discipline. We're going to be looking at that last one. So with that being said, thank you so much for watching. It took me a minute to get this together, and it's crazy how, and I'll be feeling like this is attack too. I honestly feel like this is an attack too, because I get interruptions while I'm doing the videos that I try to navigate around. I feel myself becoming drained and tired, just suddenly yawning suddenly, but I am also persistent. So being that it's after 3, and being that I have to edit this video, I'm just going to edit this video to air on tomorrow, which is Wednesday. But everything that we looked at is from yesterday's study. And then a couple of interspersed things that I shared was actually from my study today. So again, with that being said, thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. Bye for now.